Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I am here to give you guys my full series review on John Gwynne's The Faithful and the Fallen. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a very basic, spoiler-free review of this entire series so that if any of you watching have not read The Faithful and the Fallen, you can kind of get my overall thoughts on the series without hearing all of the spoilers. I have so many things about this series that I love. There were some things that I had kind of a major problem with. So buckle up, Buttercup, because here is my review of John Gwynne's The Faithful and the Fallen. For those of you coming in brand new and fresh to John Gwynne's Faithful and the Fallen series, here's some basics about the series if you're trying to decide if you want to read it or not. There are 4 books in this series: Malice, Valor, Ruin, and Wrath. They range from about 700 to 800 pages per book, so that should give you kind of a general idea of what to expect. The basic premise of this book follows the axis of the story, and that character is Corbin. Corbin is a young farm boy whose father is a blacksmith, and he lives with his sister and his parents in Dunkerrig, which is a fortress slash town. Corbin begins to learn swordsmanship and the ways of the warrior from Gar, who is the city's stable master, who has a very secretive kind of past, and it's very obvious very quickly that there's more to him than meets the eye. Now, alongside Corbin, we are introduced to a plethora of other characters, including Veritas, who is a young warrior who becomes the first sword or right-hand man to a young king who is his friend. We meet that young king, Nether, who has a lot of pressure on him very early on. While some of these characters are definitely morally gray, I would say the series as a whole tends to lean more towards the evil versus good kind of themes, but John Gwynne does it in such a way that it is continually expanding on itself throughout the quartet. New players are being introduced. We have a very solid chosen one theme. We have coming of age themes. We have good versus evil. We have a prophecy theme, which states kind of the end of the world and a second reckoning between these two incredibly supernatural forces. And that's where you kind of get the core of the good versus evil themes in this story. So if you're looking for a book that is really going to give you some just solid, very easily accessible fantasy set in a kind of Celtic inspired world, there's a lot of lore, there's a lot of prophetic history to this story. There are a ton of characters, you guys. If you can't find a character that you like in this series, I don't know what to tell you. Some of the things to be aware of when you're going into this series. One is that there are a lot of POVs, and they switch very quickly. The chapters are pretty short, and we go back and forth between POVs. It can be a little jarring, honestly, but if you kind of settle into the rhythm of it, the POVs are actually kind of refreshing because you do get to jump into different people's head through all of the different scenes. If you are an Animal Companions fan, you will freaking love this book, okay? This is some of the coolest animal companion work I have ever seen in a fantasy novel. It's brilliant. Some of these animal companions are just absolutely S tier. They're incredible. And I won't spoil it more than that, but I'm telling you, if you're an Animal Companions fiend, this is the book series for you. Another thing to look forward to is John Gwynne's action scenes. John Gwynne is a Viking reenactor from the UK, and he is very good at describing very immersive, very realistic action scenes for the most part, and he uses a bunch of different types of weapons, which is something that I really appreciated. This is not just everybody has swords kind of fantasy. There are bowmen, there are spearmen, there are axe wielders, there's warhammers, there's swords, there's, you know, other things that are a little bit more DIY weapon that I won't mention, but they're amazing. Now I'm going to do the spoilery section of this video, which I'm very excited about because I have so much to say and I need to let it out somewhere, so obviously my YouTube channel is the place to do that. I'm going to go through 4 different categories. We're going to go through plot, characters, world building, and style. Plot points that I thought that John Gwynne mastered. One of those was using the plot throughout the books to really build the relationships between the characters. That was something that I really, really appreciated in this series. I thought he did a great job of interweaving the characters and making everyone matter, like everybody has a part to play. On the opposite side of that, I will say that there was a lot of traveling. There was a lot of traveling in these books. It's just mind-blowing. The armies in this book are moving all over the place, which I realize, like, is a war thing. Like, I get that, but when it's in a book, it is really difficult to portray that and so much of it without it dragging a little bit eventually. One of the things that I will say about the plot that was a struggle for me personally is there were a lot of things that I felt were very convenience driven. A really great example of this was Rafe finding the Starstone Cup. I thought was like incredibly convenient based on how it happened. I was like, so his dog is in a bog drowning and he's trying to save it, and then he starts to drown. He's dying. He grabs this thing in the bog and is like, this feels interesting, let me pull this out with me. Here's something that I need to get off my chest, and this was, I think, my biggest problem with the plot of this whole series. So the book of this series that I went into with the highest expectations is Ruin, because most people will say it is their favorite book in the series and that it's incredibly tense, and one of the reasons why it is so incredibly tense is because of the duel that happens in this book. I was convinced that it was going to be Corbin versus Veritas, and I was a wreck over that. Why? Because Corbin is a chosen one, okay? Corbin has the most ridiculous amount of plot armor ever. As soon as I realized that I thought it was going to be Corbin versus Veritas in the duel, I panicked. I panicked so hard because I'm like, no, Corbin can't die. He has plot armor. Veritas, on the other hand, has nothing. And I can totally see John Gwynne killing this man, and I'm not okay with it. I loved Veritas. I got to the duel, and I realized that Veritas was nowhere to be found. Like, he's nowhere near Corbin. And I was like, okay, so it's not gonna be Veritas. I wonder who on earth is gonna be in this duel. Then we find out that it's Sumer. He is this deadly, terrifying warrior. And the duel definitely portrayed him that way, so I'm not upset about that in any way. But here's where I had the problem. When I got to the duel and I realized it was Sumer who was fighting Corbin, I was relieved on one end that it wasn't Veritas, but I was also a little disappointed because that tension that I had throughout the whole book, and that was, in fairness, my expectations. John Gwynne can write his book however he wants, but Sumer specifically I felt like was a tough choice to give the duel the kind of weight and tension that I was expecting. And here's why. Sumer is a Kadoshim, right? The Kadoshim are the most deadly creatures on this planet currently because we only have one Ben Elim. Michael he's by himself. So we have these hordes of Kadoshim, and Sumer is one of the most deadly. I knew from the moment Sumer came down to fight Corbin that he was gonna die, and Corbin wasn't, and that it was going to be this like massive thing that added a bunch of morale to everybody because look at the Chosen One who killed this Kadoshim. The duel itself was written beautifully. It was absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautifully written. I loved it. But there was no tension. I had absolutely no tension during that duel whatsoever. And the thing that I think it also did to kind of hurt the plot and the characters is that now I have less respect for how dangerous the Kadoshim are, which partially, I think, now having finished the series, was something that maybe John Gwynne intended, because we have to get to a point where these things are killable. I know that the duel is a huge, huge highlight for a lot of people in this series, and I totally understand that. So, you know, like, this is just my personal opinion on that. The other thing that I'll mention at the very end of Wrath, Lycos should have died. Like, there is no freaking way that he should have made it to the end of this book. And when he was still there, like, don't get me wrong, his ending, fabulous. I loved it. I was like, yes. The fact that Lycos made it all the way back by himself through the forest, through the warbands with the Starstone Torque without a hiccup is very suspicious to me. I really enjoyed a lot of the things that John Gwynne utilized, especially in the battle scenes. I loved the fact that we were introduced to like warriors who are just starting to use a shield wall and learning how to, you know, kind of change their idea of what battle looks like and how to fight an enemy. And I really appreciated that. I appreciated that John Gwynne managed to keep my tension fairly high through a great portion of this series. That was awesome. But I would not say that that is one of the strengths of this story as a whole. So I think with plot, that's pretty much all I'm going to say. That I think is where I had the biggest issues with this series. But my favorite parts of the series are coming up next, because now we're going to talk about characters. Makwin and Veritas were definitely in my top two. I would say those are easily my top two characters. I loved the romance between Makwin and Fidel so much. It was beautiful. That scene with Makwin running across the Bridge of Swords to Fidel at the end, that was brilliant. Like, brilliant way to close that out, because we still get our happy ending in a way. And I really appreciated that, especially for two characters that have been through so much in this story. Like, he really pulled out all of the stops with Makwin and Fidel. These two characters have been through it. Another character that had really grown on me by the end of this book was Camlin. I really loved Camlin. I thought he was awesome. But honestly, Dath as well. Dath was a great character. He and Pharrell really were sweet, and I loved their dedication and loyalty to Corbin. I loved Alkyon. Alkyon, the giant, I would say is probably also in my like top 5 characters. I thought he was brilliant. I was so ready for him to break his chains. I can't even tell you. I loved him. Kraft goes without saying. I loved Kraft. Kraft was great. Kraft was just Coraline, Hallion, and Conal. I really loved that trio of siblings and how they were split apart by this war, and how it just really goes to show that, yeah, like, families are often divided in times of war, and things don't, like, that's an extra beyond the actual horrors of the war itself. That really is a great way to show the individual and personal extra layer, I think, of pain that comes with war, is that when you have a divided family, you know, you could meet your brother on the battlefield. I wished I had seen a little bit more of the three of them, because especially with Coraline fitting in there, it really didn't feel like she was actually one of the siblings throughout most of the book. Storm is a great character. I think she actually added a lot to Corbin's character, because even though he was a very heavily tropey chosen one character, Storm really added to him as a character, I think, and gave him an extra level of depth, because what I cared about the most about Corbin was his relationships to the other characters that I loved, and Storm was one of those. And seeing Corbin, you know, at his most vulnerable with Storm, and that she was such a constant anchor for him throughout this story, along with obviously Gar and Brenna and Kywin and a lot of the others. But Storm, there's always something very special about an animal and their human. I am going to talk about Makwin a little bit. I also am a big fan of gladiator tropes, and so it did not surprise me in any way, shape, or form that Makwin was one of my favorite characters. His character arc in general was so powerful, and I think one of the strongest in the entire story. I was very impressed with his whole story arc and where he came from to where he got, and the fact that that through line through the entire 4 books of his oath, and that he needed to protect someone so badly, just really added to his character. And then I love that John Gwynne put him with Fidel, because she's this gorgeous queen who has her own incredible amounts of trauma to deal with. And Makwin is a rugged, torn-up pit fighter, and I absolutely love that John Gwynne put them together, and that Fidel saw Makwin for who he was, and how loyal and how kind-hearted, honestly, he is at the heart of things. He was honestly the POV that pulled me through the story the most, I think. I was constantly wanting to get back to him and see where he was at. I would say he's possibly my favorite character. Veritas is a very, very close second. He's got a good heart. He wants to do the right thing, and he believes he is doing the right thing, but he's on the wrong side because he's blind and he's a little dense, honestly, but he's been deceived. I was constantly like, Veritas, you idiot, tear off this blindfold and get on the right side, because I loved the idea of him and Corbin fighting together. And so in the last book, when I finally was given that as a reader, I just was so happy. I was so happy. As far as the female characters go, and this is a constant issue for me, so this is not like a John Gwynne Faithful and the Fallen thing, this is just me reading in general. I really have a hard time loving female characters in books, in movies, etc. Part of that is one of the struggles that I feel like happened in this book a little bit. Brina was obviously very distinct because she was older and she had, that kind of crone aspect to her. But the female voices in this story did feel somewhat similar to two female characters that I did really, really love, actually, thinking back on this book. Idana was one of them. She was really cool, and I liked her story arc from young terrified princess to like battle warrior queen at the end of Wrath. That was a great story arc, and she honestly, I was rooting so hard for her. I would say, yeah, Idana is my favorite female character in this story. I would say also Meg. Meg is great. I love that Camlin is now like a single dad. That's just an awesome turn of events. That was another great story arc. One last thing that I will say about the characters as a whole is that I think John Gwynne did a great job serving us a wide variety of villain types. Moving on to world building, I felt like I was reading a history book half the time because John Gwynne did such a great job bringing this very Celtic-inspired series to life in everything, the language, the fighting styles, the weapons. I think he just did a great job bringing in a period of history that he is obviously very passionate about, and you can tell that just based on reading this series. And I think that was a cool moment for me to see his historian side coming through, because it really added a lot of richness. I never doubted the world. It was very immersive. It felt very historical, like I was just reading a different world's history book. We kind of get this double dimension in the story, and I thought the other world was a really good counterpart. Battle tactics and just armies, war, etc. that we were served in these stories, from the mini skirmishes all the way up to the, multi-army war that we had at the end of Wrath. I thought he did a brilliant job with every level of those battles. The magic system in this series is definitely soft. It is not a hard magic system by any means, but there are some rules and limitations to it. Last but not least, writing style. John Gwynne has a very straightforward writing style. His prose is not super poetic or dense. It is very straightforward, which honestly I feel like fits the type of story that we are reading. It reads like a historic account. He has absolutely ruined the word stones for me for the rest of my fantasy reading life, so I would just like to put that out there. Like, there was a lot of stone crushing going on in this book, which I had to kind of smile at because it happened a lot. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'd love to further this discussion in the comments, so if any of you guys want to talk about anything within the quartet of books, please leave them down in the comments below, and I would love to chat with you guys about them. Let me know which of these books is your favorite and why. Let me know who your favorite characters are. I would love to hear your favorite characters in this series. I'm very happy to have finished this series, yet another checkbox off of the series I have actually completed, which is a feat for me, apparently. But I hope you guys are all having a fabulous, fabulous week. I hope you are all reading books that you are loving, and I will see you in the next video.